Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon or teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they are pretty good preachers. All right, let's get started. Peter, where are we in the church year?
We're talking about the text for the second Sunday after the Epiphany.
And David, what are the texts this week?
Isaiah 62, 1 Corinthians 12, John 2, and Psalm 128.
As always, I ask each of you to tell me which text you would choose to preach about. To determine who goes first. So the readings from Isaiah today, God says he will change Israel's name. When you were a kid, did you like the name that you were given or did you want to change it?
For a brief period, I wanted to change it to Shapley.
Shapley?
No.
Shapley?
Shapley, yeah.
Was that a character in a book?
No, I was just thinking of being an author, and my name would be Ernest Shapley. Who wants Ernest? That's such a horrible name.
Hemingway,
I don't know
of course you thought
why
that
did
for
I
an
do that?
How old
author.
were you when you wanted this?
I can't say.
That's great.
Peter, did you want to change your name?
I liked my name. It was unique. I always liked the connection to the Apostle Peter and the name meaning rock, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cool. So
David, you win.
Okay,
you get to go
good.
first.
So I would probably go with the Isaiah text. And I don't know, there's just some beautiful poetry there. And I was starting to think about the text, and I really didn't get much further than the first verse.
all right, well, it's a good place to start.
I really like the first verse. So, Jessica, could you read verse 1?
For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness and her salvation as a burning torch.
Okay. It just struck me there that Isaiah, the relationship between the prophet and the people to whom he's prophesying. I always think of the prophets and their courage, their dedication to the task of preaching this word. I always see that in relationship to it's the word of the Lord. So they're carrying this burden, this message from the Lord that they need to proclaim. And so for the Lord's sake, they're going to proclaim this because they've been called to do that. And it just struck me so oddly that Isaiah says, for Zion's sake, I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet. That the other factor here is the people for whom you're preaching. And for their sake, you're not going to be quiet because you have a message that is for their good. In this case, he has a message of hope that in the future, the Lord's going to turn things around. And so, I don't know, it just made me, think of the task of holy advocacy, where we find those who do not have a voice, and we are the ones who are advocating for them, and we're the ones who are speaking up for them. And I think in our culture, we're so driven by our own voice and our own needs, and, speak up for yourself. You've got to make yourself heard. And I don't know, this passage just struck me as offering us a different way, that as we enter into the world, it's not about us making our statement, but about us speaking words that are for others. And for their sake, we're not going to be silent because we need to speak to this issue. We need to speak for these people. We need to speak the hope that will give them life and sustain them.
I think that's just a really helpful way to think about preaching overall. You get, especially if you're preaching every Sunday, sometimes I think, at least for me, it was every once in a while easy to lose track of, it's for the people that I'm preaching. I'm preaching for their good.
Right.
And that sets a whole tone for it's kind of a whole gospel tone. I think about the definition of preaching
Right.
we use
Yeah,
for the
benefit of the hearers. Right.
We're preaching for their benefit. And just to put yourself in that mindset to identify with the prophet here, to me, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and I just think, that's not an easy task. I mean, if I had a theme, I'd probably have something like love for the long haul. That you're speaking a message of grace, of hope, of love, but it's not always something that immediately changes life circumstances. So you think here of Isaiah, he's speaking a word that's really in the distant future, right? I mean, Israel is not yet in exile, and he's preaching words that are going to be recorded and are going to be read to them when they are in exile, and those words are going to be about a deliverance from exile. So we're really far, and yet for their sake, he's not going to shut up. I'm going to keep talking about this until the brightness dawns for you. And you just think of so many life situations where you're an advocate. I mean, with my mother's health issues, she needs an advocate there to speak with the doctors and to talk about these things. And there's just so many, people who are lost, people who have wandered away from the church. Who's their advocate? The social workers who are engaged in caring for people. They see these other people and recognize that God has a word for them and a word for their life, and you just have the courage to continue to speak, even though it may not bring about an immediate change. I guess that's kind of what I see going on here for me.
This is so far in the future, and so much of what we preach, we won't see the fruit of.
Right. Yeah, we're given a future promise that's going to sustain people.
Right.
And
because
long
of
after
that,
we're gone.
And because of that, we can't keep silent. We can't be quiet. I may be tired. I may be worn out, but I can't. I can't until the brightness dawns, until the salvation comes.
Right.
This would be a kind of sermon that I would benefit from myself as a preacher from, I think. And that stance comes from a good news, a good message that you have to preach.
Right.
Sometimes we think things like, I can't keep silent, I've got to speak up to speak a word of criticism or something. But no, I can't keep silent because I've got something really good to share.
Yeah.
And so you think about parents or grandparents in the congregation who have children or grandchildren who are distant from the Lord. They can't keep silent.
Right.
But not to tear the kids down or to criticize the grandkids, but because they've got this good news, this salvation
to share with
coming.
them this promise, right, that is for them, and they can see it, and they're going to keep talking until it shines. Right. The mutual consolation of the saints, this applies to that we're, to bear one another's burdens, to lift one another up, to speak the word to one another, let the word of Christ dwell within you richly, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. That passage from Colossians is really, it's directed toward the laity, not the clergy. And so there is that advocacy, that speaking up for and sharing the word of God with other people that is happening among all of us.
Oh, that would be great for me to hear. So I can't pass the buck. People go, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a pastor.
And there's different ways in which, your callings provide you different kinds of opportunities, right? So if you're working in education or your kids are in school, you're constantly speaking the word to them, even though they may not want to sit and talk with you about their day. They just want to put on their headphones and play on their phone or whatever. But, you're not going to shut up. You're not going to be quiet because you're going to keep speaking for their sake, because this righteousness is going to dawn. And it's a promise that you're sharing with them.
Well, and you've got the language from 1 Corinthians 12, the epistle reading about the Spirit who leads people to proclaim Jesus as Lord, but then also these the gifts, the variety of gifts. A lot of them are speaking gifts, utterance of wisdom, prophecy, distinguishing between spirits. These are, the impression you get in Corinth is that Paul is trying to help them understand the Spirit is leading them to speak, and he wants to help them speak in healthy ways.
Right.
So there may be a connection to make there with the epistle reading.
Yeah, that'd be good. And then you have, Mary speaking up for the people who've lost the wine.
Right.
Oh, thanks, David. Peter, what about you? What would you preach about?
Well, I was tempted to suggest a 2-part series on 1 Corinthians 12.
Okay.
Because the lectionary gives you 2 readings from 1 Corinthians 12, and then it skips ahead to chapter 14, which is kind of odd. Maybe they figured that you'll go with 13 for a wedding this summer or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. But there's 2 short readings.
And
breaks
you know
up
what,
1
though?
Corinthians
Wouldn't
12.
it be nice to hear 1 Corinthians 13 outside the context of a wedding?
Right. I mean, this is where you might want to adjust. If I'm looking ahead to the whole season of Epiphany, I mean, I might massage the epistle readings and just read continually from chapter 12 to, I think it goes to the end of 14, maybe 15, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'd look ahead and look at the next 5 or 6 weeks and see what you might do. But if you stick strictly with the lectionary, I'd be tempted to do a series on 1 Corinthians 12. And the series would be something like one spirit, one body, because the first half of chapter 12 is all about the spirit. The second half is the analogy of the body. Or maybe I would go with something like unity and diversity, Jesus style, and talk about the unity we have, the gift of the Spirit, but many different spirits, the unity we have in the body and many different parts and functions. I think you could do a lot of stuff with 1 Corinthians 12. But I decided not to go that route.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Because there's also some really cool texts coming up in the Gospels, and that's what I want to focus on.
Okay.
So consider the 1 Corinthians 12 mini-series there an option. I just love this text from John chapter 2, the wedding at Cana. It's such a great text, and I think maybe it's just been a while since I heard a sermon or preached a sermon on it, and I thought this is too good to pass up.
Oh, fun. I'm looking forward to this.
So first of all, I'm just going to assume, Jessica, and this is maybe a big assumption, that you like this text.
Sure. Parties are fun. How cool. Jesus
Yeah.
was at a real party. His mom was there. They have a mother-son talk. That's pretty fun. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things that I was trying to think about. Why do I like this text? And it's a celebration. I can't think of too many events that Jesus went to that we also do something similar here. You know, he went to the synagogue, and we sometimes say, well, that's church, and, he was in the marketplaces, whatever. But we go to weddings, and weddings are a celebration. They're a time of joy, a great time. I love that he was invited to the text specifically says he was invited to the wedding. And so, we get wedding invitations, that kind of thing.
With his disciples.
Yeah, he was invited with his. It's really kind of interesting when you slow it down and look at the details.
I like that.
I'm actually going to play with that a little bit.
That's good.
A little bit later, but I'm also just thinking about, why do I like this? I like this text because it's very human.
Yes.
There's a lot of emotion kind of in the background of this text. You've got the joy of a wedding. You've got all the bittersweetness of, kids growing up and leaving home. And I mean, I'm sure it was different back then. But then you have the embarrassment of running out of wine and the shame that comes along with that. But then you've got the pride that the master of the party says, you guys are, you've kept the best for last. And so you've got kind of this emotional roller coaster, which makes me feel like this text is very human. This kind of humanizes Jesus. There's just a lot of stuff about this text. And then, of course, it's the first sign in John's gospel. So that's got huge theological ramifications. So there's actually, you could do a couple weeks in a row on this text, frankly. But so if you were gonna go with a single sermon on this text, I think I would go with some sort of theme that might be something like more than you ask for. And I would play with this idea that when Jesus was invited to the party, invited to the celebration, they got more than they asked for.
Yeah.
You think about
without even knowing it.
Without even knowing it.
Yeah.
I think I would try to do maybe a narrative sermon here, maybe a biblical story applied, where you would spend the first half of the sermon just telling the story. So the first part of the sermon, I think I would just tell the story, and highlight the humanity, highlight the emotions that were involved, help people see how remarkable this sign of Jesus actually is. And then probably, I'm not sure exactly where I would talk about the signs in here because the signs in John really are important. The miracles in John are called signs. So they're not so much just wonders that he did, but they're pointing towards something. And so the whole Gospel of John is going in this direction. And of course, it's a sign of who Jesus is as the one who not only can do anything, but cares enough about people to deliver them from shame, at least in this text.
I think it would be helpful for us in the pew to give some background about why that would be shameful. Running out of wine at a wedding doesn't seem like too big of a problem. Why would Jesus use that as that's kind of a wasted miracle?
Yeah.
Right? So tell me a little bit more about why that would be culturally significant.
You'd want to do a little bit of looking into wedding culture of the first century. From the little bit I've read, it's usually a week-long celebration, and at least the purification jars, different commentaries give you different numbers, but one I looked at said 110 gallons per jar.
Wow.
And that's a lot of wine. And so I don't know exactly. I would do some looking at the culture of weddings back then. I think shame is a big piece of this. That I think we know that the culture back then was more of an honor-shame culture than we're in now.
And it would be shameful to not feed your guests, right? It would be bad hospitality to run out of wine.
Yeah, if you think about it, you've got this week-long celebration, and you're obligated to provide. And when you can't provide, that's a real problem. People can't just go provide for themselves. So bringing them into the culture that culture of a wedding celebration would be a helpful part of telling that story. So the first part would maybe, if I were going to break it down, more than they asked for, and they being the people who invited Jesus. And then I would, with a narrative applied or story applied sermon, then I would talk to the hearers in their context, and I would make a turn to say, well, Jesus is more than we've asked for also. And I would invite people to imagine how many times they invite Jesus to be part of their lives. Can you guys think about times when you invite Jesus to be part of your life?
Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest. You say it with a common meal
Right,
prayer.
we say it all the time with a meal prayer.
Yeah.
That's an invitation, right? Come, Lord Jesus, be our guest. I'm thinking about every time you pray the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, we're asking God to establish his reign. You don't have to get into, we don't invite Jesus into our heart here. I don't think you don't need to go there necessarily in a sermon. Just preach the gospel, and maybe if there's a congregation that is influenced by that kind of thinking, you might want to point out how you're not talking about salvation here. We're talking about the Christian life, where we do invite Jesus into our lives regularly. And when we do invite him, he brings more than we ask for also.
Right.
Sometimes the more that he brings is so much better. His forgiveness, his love, his mercy is so much more gratuitous and more generous and more all-encompassing than we could possibly imagine. I think about Paul to the Ephesians. He who is able to do far more abundantly than we ask or imagine. The good wine, the honor that was restored or preserved, the celebration that continued, because if he brought more than they possibly could have asked.
And you have that, it just happens again and again in the miracles in John, right? The feeding of the 5,000, much more than they had asked for. And you've got these events where Jesus is exceeding, blowing up expectations of what he's going to be able to do. It's just amazing.
Well, and there's a way you could think about the servants. Some of the thoughts I had was he provides more than we ask for us, and he provides more than we ask through us.
Oh, nice. Nice.
The servants, if you do dwell with the servants in this story a little bit longer, they would have been on the hot seat, right? Because servants are the ones who are providing what is consumed at the party.
Right, yeah.
And so they're going to have to be telling everybody, sorry, we're out.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, we're out. Excuse me, I'll have some more. Sorry, we're out. And so he's providing really for them.
And then you've got this guest, and Mary says, do whatever he tells you.
Well, what's interesting, too, is I think this is Mary's introduction to the Gospel of John. It is more than she asked for, too, what he provided. And it's probably more than the disciples asked for when they started following this guy, and he certainly, Jesus provides more than we ask for.
Yeah, I mean, so like with Mary, what more she gets is that, she asked for wine and she ends up with disciples believing in her son.
So you've got a lot to work with here, but I think the basic focus would be the invitation, and they got a whole lot more than they asked for when they invited Jesus.
Thanks, guys. That's all for today. We have more free resources to guide your next step in planning at concordiatheology.org. Check it out. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Natsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday. Shapley.
Shapley?
Shapley, yeah.
Shapley Schmidt.